and it was so exciting. But then driving home that day, it was just like, wait, what? You want we're gonna do what?
Thanks for
Oh,
joining
thanks
me,
for
guys.
having us.
Thanks
Yeah.
for having us,
That's,
Ashton. It's
that's
great to see you,
kind.
man.
So I remember the last time that I spoke with you guys, we dived into a little bit about your guys' upbringing. And the thing that I really got from your guys' individual stories was how much of a variety of different kinds of music you guys had growing up. So for both of you guys, where did your guys' fascination with so many different kinds of music come from? And how did they coalesce into the medium that you guys currently work in, which of course is film?
Ooh, great question.
Great.
Um, I think that, I think that at least for me, coming from starting early on, like straight up, like Suzuki method at age 4, going into recitals, and then getting turned on to sort of pop music and musicals. Um, there was a sort of a broad range of like harmonic information that like I was digesting when I was young without even sort of knowing it. Um, and I think that that has sort of informed, at least on my end, sort of where I've come to with sort of I mean, we tend to love toying around with lots of things, but at the core of it, we're also sort of very thematic um, ab- about our approach, which I mean, everyone is, but I think that like that is sort of at the core, that sort of thematic chord structure, um, you know, melody, and then adding in the production, like over the years, as I think having that sort of base when I was young led me to a place where I was like, when I was a teenager, I was like, cool, like I have a good base of this stuff and I want to keep learning the technical side of this, but the production is very interesting to me. Like, oh, I can just like go to band practice and record all of us and then bring it home and add 25 more sounds to it in my bedroom. I think those sort of things all came together.
Hmm. Taylor?
Yeah, no, I mean my mom was like classically trained and was an opera singer, and my grandfather was in the symphony, and there was a little bit of like, hey, let's kind of, you should learn young and learn this, and I was like, no, I'm gonna make my own music, and my dad was strangely didn't read or write music, but he was a great guitar player, and so he was in bands, and I think that kind of those two worlds together really allowed me to grow up around music. And then, of course, I became obsessed with film music growing up. And after hearing scores like Vertigo and obviously like the great John Williams, E.T. and those kind of films, and then Back to the Future and Predator, those scores, and just those movies. So I think coming from that kind of environment, as you know, as a kid, you're hungry for more things, and then of course as time went by, you get into the technology side of it and see how that can help and hurt the process. And so that's kind of how I got into it, and that's kind of the background that of the worlds that came to be. You're always trying to follow more. At least I am. I'm always trying to learn more things, new ways, and it's exciting.
The two of us, it's interesting too that the two of us sort of coming together is sort of like an expansion of whatever the younger days of, whether it was band practice or choir or chamber orchestra, like the two of us are now sort of like our own little band, and at the core of it, it's like really fun, surrounded with like piles of stress and like chaos, but like at the core of it, it's like super fun. Like we're getting to write these things and produce the music that we write, and then feed each other to ideas and then play off of each other, just like band practice when you're young, or just like when you joined your first choir and someone sings a harmony with you and you're like, oh wow, like
Right.
this sounds even better.
So, I mean, obviously, looking back right now, you guys have such a huge arsenal of films under your belt. You guys have the sequel of The Shining under your belt. Like, looking at that, you guys scored the sequel to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. That's pretty remarkable. And for somebody like me who aspires to be a composer one day, you guys are incredibly inspiring. And what you guys have done over this period is super, super inspiring. But looking
Oh,
back
man.
at your
Thank
guys' career, this pivotal point, you know, Andy, you're scoring USC student films. Taylor, you worked for Hans for a short time, but you wanted to move on to something different. And then you guys both came together, and you guys decided that the Newton brothers, as a collective, this is how we're going to best express ourselves, is via a team. So what was that decision like when you guys made the decision, instead of separate careers, let's unite together to create music under one broad, name?
Safety in numbers. I mean, go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, I think, I actually was a fan of Andy's before we were writing together. I loved, he was one of the writers on Mothman Prophecies, and it was just, the music was beautiful and bleak as could be. And so we met via a mutual friend, and we just really hit off, but we were just kind of jamming on things that came up and now and then that happened. And, at a certain point, we both just decided, hey, let's join forces. I'm sure you can make it a little more poetic than I made it.
No, that's pretty straight on. And like when Taylor and I met, he was working on an album that I really liked a lot. It had like fantastic like harmonic structures, and it was like the melodies were very catchy and like hooky. And I mean, at the core of scoring, there is sort of again, back to the themes and melodies, like even it's one sound, two notes, whether it's like 16 minutes of notes, like whatever it is, I think that there's you're drawn to certain people and their sounds. And Taylor and I were sort of like drawn to, like, I would go over to his house while he was working on this album, and we just like, we'd riff on parts. Like he was pretty much done with the album, but we would just sort of riff on parts and hang out and then nerd out about stuff. And we both had a strong connection to film. We both loved film and film scores as well as music. And I think that those things sort of, that's sort of part of what I think brings us together with Mike too. Like, not to jump to a different place, but it's sort of related. Like, we were at Mike's house, I don't know, a couple months ago, and we were going through his vinyl collection, and it's like, oh yeah, I have like everything he has, either Taylor and I both have or one of us has. Like, we have a similar sort of music vocabulary, and it's not just it's not a small path, right?
Yeah, I mean, and also one of my questions has to do with, during that early period of starting like a composing career and getting into scoring actual films, and I would assume at Oculus you guys sort of realized, okay, we're actually getting somewhere with this. Like when Oculus came out, it became this hit, and still is like this really, really incredible like horror suspense kind of film that leads your way into other films like Ouija and eventually Gerald's Game. But how difficult was it to make that leap and to get into something like Oculus? Was it really defining your relationships and getting to know Mike? Was that really the biggest thing that opened you guys up to that film? Or was it a collective of other things that you guys also did during that period, early period?
It's, I mean, it almost didn't feel like a leap because of sort of our process leading up to it, which was always like, I mean, Taylor and I both work very hard, and that's not like, I'm not patting us on the back. It's just because we love what we do so much. It's almost a problem, like a disease. Like, we just really enjoy what we do. And I mean, we were putting the same amount of time into a student film and indie film that we put into Oculus. Like, it was all, we were the excitement level was higher, but the amount of work was very similar, like looking back. And I think that like the excitement of it really, for me, the excitement of it landed when I was like driving down Ventura Boulevard and I saw like a huge billboard off to the side of the road. I'll never forget. I pulled over and was like, this is really cool. Like that was sort of what felt like this is something different. And that's not to like demean like any part of the process. It's just that like every project we would sort of jump in and take it very seriously from the get-go, no matter like if the budget was $500 or $5 billion, which will never happen, but you know what I mean.
It's interesting too, because we would on those early films, I never forget that we would take the budget and just spend almost all of it on the orchestra, because they didn't, they didn't have enough money for, for something, some of the films we did. And we would just be like, all right, well, we have to have an orchestra. And so,
How big of an advocate was Mike in regards to, okay, let's get an orchestra, like a real orchestra involved in this? Was he up there on that?
He wasn't expecting it at first, because originally they actually originally hired someone else for Oculus, and that person got let go. It didn't work out. So they brought in a bunch of composers to meet as they do, and when we got the gig, it was kind of more of an electronic ethereal score. We kind of been like, hey, let's use live strings and layer it with the samples. And they didn't want a lot of melody for that score. I'll never forget. There's an ending of that movie that's super, emotional, and Andy and I were like, hey, let's make this super melodic. Hey, there's an idea. And because they didn't want that for the movie, we put in these little notes, and like 4 notes. And Trevor Macy, who was one of my dear friends, I love him. He would be like, what is that piano playing? Let's get that out of there. And so the end of the movie, it built to the very end, and I was super nervous. I'll never forget, because we didn't know them that well yet. I'm like, oh, we're gonna get fired, and they just both turned and looked at each other and were like, oh, yeah, that works. And so and we hired an orchestra for that. It was like a 40-piece orchestra. It was overseas because that's all we could afford at the time, but yeah, on that movie too, I think we put most of the budget into, all of it, all the players, because I think, you look at, how it is. You're a composer. You look back on what you did. You don't want something that sounds bad, because you're using strictly samples or something. You gotta go all the way.
On Oculus, we were on the red carpet, and we asked one of the studio execs if we could take a picture with him. And as we're taking a picture with him on the red carpet, he looks over and he's like, I got to ask you guys, like, how'd you get that score to sound so like big and lush? And we were like, that's a real orchestra. And he's like, how did you guys afford a real orchestra? We didn't pay you enough for that. It's just like, oh,
but you made it work. Absolutely. One thing that's very evident about Mike, but also about you two, is you guys genuinely have a love and passion for this medium. Like definitely with Mike, I've seen all of his interviews, literally, and you could tell when he's talking about movies, there is a glimmer in his eye, and he is genuinely excited. And even though he's gotten into the big studio system, he's making Warner Brothers huge movies, he's still a child at heart. He is having a blast doing this, and it seems like that's the same for you guys. One of the things that I think made Dr. Sleep so well, but really all of his things so well, is how he's able to balance fear with emotion. Like, all of the stories have a core heart with them. It's not just some slasher film with a bunch of craziness. It honestly has a core. Hush is all about female resilience and empowerment and all that. Haunting of Hill House is about family coming together. For you guys, what is the secret of scoring a film that is tension-filled but maintaining a strong heart core of the film throughout?
I think it's that dance of staying out of the way when it is emotional, and delicately walking that balance of not being melodramatic. And that obviously includes your chord progression and the melody you're playing, and not dictating too much when you shouldn't be, not telling the story when you shouldn't be. And then of course there's obviously a point when you can. Dr. Sleep was an interesting one because, obviously you've seen The Shining. It's not particularly, there's not a lot of melody in it. There's almost no melody. And so we talked early on with Mike about, like, okay, how much melody do we want to go with here? What is the idea? And he wanted to go completely atonal for the most of it. So we threw a lot of melody at it in different places, and we quickly found what was working, what wasn't. And I think that's the thing with Mike, is that he lets us try things, lets us go to the edge to where, maybe with another director composer, they wouldn't do that because they're afraid of getting fired or yelled at or both, and obviously we discuss it too. We're like, oh man, this isn't going to be good, but Mike always pushes us to try those things. So it was great on Dr. Sleep. And it's funny because I would see now and then, and some people comment like, oh, it's there's no melody, and and I'd be like, have you seen The Shining?
Right. Exactly.
And like that was a deliberate choice.
Yeah.
And it's just so funny. But yeah, I think it's that delicate balance to walk. And I think it's also the story that's being told, the story of Danny Torrance and that whole thing is a very different story than Hill House. And even just the tone of the way it's shot and the texture and the emotion, Hill House is a very delicate score. So is Bly Manor. It's not overly big. It's not meant to be. And it's just, I think it's the aesthetic that Mike has. And, he knows what he wants to do, and we chat about it. And I think it's the balance and the trying of those things. And that's kind of how it's always been since Oculus. We just didn't vocalize it as much in Oculus.
Yeah. And then finding those sort of uneasy moments is actually sometimes harder even than coming up with some of the sort of thematic stuff. Sometimes it's because, it's really easy. There's so many great sample libraries and synthesizers now. Like, it's so easy to almost just pull something up and like hit something and be like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I like that. Let's print it,
Right.
But like you can't do that. Like, that can be an option. If you find something you love, if you pull up a patch and you're just like, oh, this is great, that should be an option. But you should also, I think, try like 25 other things, because I think that Taylor and I find like 99% of the time, something down the rabbit hole is going to lead you to something where that you find something that is so interesting and unique, even if it's subtle, that you're like, this is the thing. Let's lean into this. And like Haunting of Hill House, we had like just a simple sound. It's like, and that was like, that was one of probably 30 things that we sort of tried at first. And that sort of made the short list of things that Taylor and I ended up presenting. And that was something that ended up to be really simple and doesn't change much. But I think exploring that is real important.
It's funny too, because don't you think that the melody, the melodic stuff is always so quick, but it's the noise that actually takes the longest amount of time that I spend on. Like, because everybody tends to think like, oh, the melody is the hardest part. For me, it's the easiest because it's fun to beat the piano and figure something out. But the noise is like, how do you craft that?
Right.
Yeah.
And there is so much, specifically in Dr. Sleep, like the amount of sound design is crazy. Like there are so many, like, it sounds like custom sounds having to do with like demented voices and basses that are trembling and guttural. Like, how do you guys even start by like being like, okay, here's what kind of sound we're going for? Is it a lot of experimentation and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we were listening to, obviously, I don't know if you know, in The Shining, they music edited like liggity, like it was on top of each other, different composers. So you'd be like, wait, what is that? Like, you couldn't, and it would be like just the blending of these clusters, and you would try to be like figuring it out. You'd be like, oh, but we spent a lot of time, detailing the blueprints of The Shining and to figure out what we wanted to touch on and what we didn't. And we spent probably 3 months just figuring out, like, we brought in the hurdy-grande, and then we sampled that wind harp that the birds and the airplanes ruined everything. And like, it was just, and then I was super nervous about Warner Brothers coming to Capitol Records and us renting out this space for just this giant thing that kind of sounds a little bit like a lawnmower, and it's just like, hey guys, got this great idea. Trust me, and like, Mike, of course, was like, he heard it early on, so we had his support. But it's a process. We use so much. We use so little. We did so many takes of so many different things that we barely even touched for Dr. Sleep. And then on the orchestral side, we did some crazy stuff, even with just the arrangement and the layout. We had Mark Graham, our orchestrator. We were like, hey, wouldn't it be great to start the melody here and finish it on the other side, with the other string players, and finish chords and notes. And it just felt really off and moving. And the orchestra, they really got into it. It was a lot of fun for everybody. It was one of those projects where it was like, this is going to be really good, or this is not going to work. So
yeah, and I think a good example of like how, you know, because you're a composer, you'll understand this. Like, there's moments where you feel like, oh, this might be the worst idea. Like, what am I doing? Like I felt the epitome of that on the first. Usually, Taylor and I will both sort of like, we'll talk about things we're going to do, and then we'll both go try those things and then bring them together. So, like with the wind harp, I had some friends up in San Francisco, so I made a weekend trip out of it and flew up on a Saturday morning. And I was like, I'll go check it out and we'll see what happens. And I flew up there, and you get to the wind harp, and it's like in a small park in the middle of nowhere, not in the middle of nowhere, but like South San Francisco, and there's no one around in this park. And I got there, and there it is, just standing there. And I have like my little like shitty like microphone, and like and there's not much wind, and I'm just like, oh, okay, maybe this is like all a waste of time. But then I checked the weather report, and I had some friends who are meteorologists. They were like, hey, there's going to be a little bit of wind this afternoon. So I went and ran some errands, went back in the afternoon. And then when I came back, I was like, oh, this is making some crazy sounds. So then it was like, oh, maybe this is a good idea. And then eventually when we did like the official recording session there, the first day we did it was January 30th of 2000. I forget what it was, what year. I don't even know what year we're in now.
20,
whatever
I
year
think.
it was. 2018. Actually, it would have been 2018. January 30th. December 30th, 2018. And there was too much wind. It was like 70 miles an hour, and you couldn't hear anything. So we had a Hail Mary, and on New Year's Eve, we did another session, and that ended up being the session that worked. And the recording engineer had some awesome, like crazy mic extensions, and it ended up working out. It's like the whole scene at the bar is the wind harp as it was recorded.
And that scene is scored so well because, first of all, that is the scene that I continue going back and rewatching like over and over again because like the writing is so good. And
So
again,
good.
like Henry Thomas, and oh my God, it is so well done. When Mike comes to you, I mean, I don't know, if somebody came to my house and knocked on my front door and said, all right, Ashton, next week we are making a sequel to The Shining. Are you on board? I would have taken a double take and been like, what are you thinking? So when Mike came to you and said, okay, here's my vision for the film, what was going on in your heads just in regards to those first ideas and all the stuff that was just happening initially right off the bat?
Oh man, I know exactly where we were. We were standing outside at a Haunting of Hill House dub stage, and he was taking a smoke break, but I think he wasn't smoking. I think he had quit smoking maybe by then. But we were taking like a break. And he told us like he basically in that conversation told us what he wanted. He was like, I want the big DSE Ray theme. I want it to be its own expansion of The Shining. I want it to have its own unique identity, but I want it to like also be in the world. I mean, there's excitement when he's telling us this because this was the first time he told us. He's like, you guys are doing this. This is what's happening. You're doing this, and I'm excited for it. And blah, blah, and we got into the creative, and it was so exciting. But then driving home that day, it was just like, wait, what? We're gonna do what? I mean, you can never think that, like you get to a place where you just have to commit and do your best, but I would be lying if I didn't say like it was definitely terrifying, at first.
It's one of my top 5 films, The Shining. So when he said that, my heart was just beating so fast because I was like, wait, wow, this is crazy. And then I just couldn't sleep when we left. I couldn't sleep that night. And the first thing I did, I just started rereading the book again. I just opened up The Shining and just started rereading it again and taking notes. And and then we both probably watched that film so many times. And then we went through the process. But yeah, that initial moment was like excitement, fear.
So is the biggest way that you guys get through that fear is just to start working and getting ideas on the table?
I mean, Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest fear I think composers and I've obviously I've spoken to a lot of them about this too is it's just failing. It's failing to do what's needed, and so and on some projects, not so much Mike, but there can be many cooks in the kitchen, and I think the best way to always avoid stuff or problems is to be just super prepared. Always be prepared. Always know where things are going. Write multiple cues. Give options. Those kinds of things will save you when someone's like, "I hate this," because it will happen, and you need to be prepared. And the thing about Mike is that again, he always has our back, and he's always pushing for the creative to be as best as it can be, and we're pushing for the same. So that certainty, at least that part of it is comforting. Then there's the other side, which is not so comforting, which is obviously you don't want to let anyone down. So again, and I think you just start. I mean, you've spoken to so many guys, I'm sure, Hans, and it's a blank page. You just start writing.
Yeah, and I think too, like, to add to that, I think there's the idea that the calming to that fear is that, hey, we've done this a bunch, and that's not to say we're gonna hit a home run or do a bad job, but we know what we need to do to start. Like, you sit down and you just do the thing that you've always done. And I think that even as I get older, I notice that I really appreciate people who have a craft, whatever their craft is. Like, they just do their craft, and they don't really think about sort of what has led to it necessarily, or what it will be. They sit in the moment with it and do their best to sort of work on their craft within the context of that picture. I mean, I even saw, like, 3 weeks ago, Trent and Atticus were doing this wonderful interview, and we're talking about the Pixar movie, and just saying, like, at first they were like, we were trying to be Randy Newman, like, doing Pixar, and as they got into it, they were just like, oh, Randy Newman would do that. Like, we're going to do what we would do. Just like when we got onto Dr. Sleep, we're going to do what we're going to do. And luckily Mike gives us lots of rope to either hang ourselves or to make some really pretty, like, rope collages of interesting things.
Well, that's what I think works so well. It's like, I mean, you guys know this definitely better than me, or I think anyone really. It's like, sometimes music can be used to so-called, like, save the film, or it's like the last thing that can help to save a scene or something. But the thing with Mike, it seems like he's already done such a brilliant job of establishing the scene, of writing the scene, of shooting the scene with a lot of fluidity and detail. And it's up to you guys to really just paint it in and to, I wouldn't say stay out of the way, but really just accompany it and not necessarily get over it. So what is that process like for you guys in terms of, like, staying minimal enough, but at the same time knowing when you guys can bring in a melody, or when you could bring in, the piano line? How do you guys determine when that's appropriate or when it's not?
It's interesting because it changes for each project, definitely, obviously, depending on the narrative of the story and what's being told. But for Bly Manor, for instance, we were able to add a lot more harmonic content to the score than we were to the first season. And a lot of it was because there were these moments of emptiness, and where the music could almost be a voice, could be a character for a moment. And it would sort of tell you what to feel for a moment about something, but then later on, maybe it was misleading or was telling you to feel something that was different. And I think knowing when, like, there's a moment when there's two characters that are giving an amazing performance, and you're so captivated when you're watching them, and you're like, oh my gosh, and it's slightly romantic and maybe mysterious, and then you have this music, it's just like la da da da, it just ruins the scene. Like, it just tells you to feel this kind of syrupiness that's just doesn't work for that particular story, where that may work for something else. In this scene, it doesn't. And Mike is very particular and very sensitive to that. And I think we know that balance, that delicateness, needs to kind of walk that line. And it's a process too, because sometimes you may think that, I can make it big here or be busy here, and maybe he doesn't want it. So I think it's a process. And I think season 2 was more interesting because we had Mike's ear way early on season 1. We were sending him cues while they were shooting. And on season 2, we had written a lot of stuff as well, and we talked about different ideas, different things. But he was busy for a beat, and then he finally came back in, and he was getting into the details. But that little space was like, I don't know if this is gonna, how this is gonna fly. There's that sort of feeling. But it worked out, and I think it's just kind of you learn as each director you're working with. You learn what their tastes are. Mike has a certain aesthetic with his films and his storytelling that accompanies all his films, even though they're sometimes completely different and they're rooted in something different. If you listen to Hush and you listen to Before I Wake, they sound so different. But the way that he tells the story and his aesthetic of it, there is a sort of connection, and that's what makes Mike so great. Is that he's a writer, director, and he's actually a composer. To be honest, like he's all those things, and he's very good at all of them. And of course, that makes our job that much easier.
So one thing I would love to explore a little bit of before we get into Bly Manor, because as I said to Taylor before I started this, I finished Bly Manor literally like an hour ago. So it's really fresh in my mind, really enjoyed it. I'd recommend it for anyone that's seen Hill House, definitely check it out. But the thing that when I first saw Dr. Sleep, and by the way, if people haven't seen Dr. Sleep, the director's cut, so good. It's a 3-hour version of the movie, but it's really it seems like Mike's full vision for the film. But with that film, there's a certain soundscape that has to do with heartbeats. And constantly throughout the movie, there are just these thumps and these heartbeats that are just building tension all throughout. Can you guys talk about where that idea came from, and when did you guys agree to fully commit to that idea? Because it's something that reappears all throughout.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was an early conversation that we had with Mike, wasn't it? Am I wrong?
No, it was, yeah. So if you watch the original Shining, there is a sort of high piercing sound that goes like, ee! And then there's this heartbeat, and that those effects that are used at moments in the film, they are kind of describing The Shining, the actual element of The Shining. So Mike wanted to kind of continue that sort of feel throughout the film to, again, to kind of show The Shining or what's happening with that ability. And it became sort of the driving through line for the film. And we also had for Abra, we had these bells that were more for her communication with Dan. And they're kind of these wind chimey bells. And that, so we took aspects and kind of built upon our own Shining sort of element, but that particular heartbeat came derived from The Shining, and that was straight up just Mike's idea. He wanted to do that, and so we were trying to figure out ways we could intricate it into the score, and so we would slow it down, we would speed it up, and then we would we even had some sections where it was this Doppler effect, and we'd be moving, and it was mixed in Atmos, so it was this kind of
moving around the theater in a way.
Yeah, moving around, and it was Jonathan Wales, who's just a genius mixer. He was mixing it around, and I just remember being like, wow, this is super effective, and it was at times incredibly minimal, but very effective, especially when Rose was flying in the sky, and it's all you hear is this sort of this heartbeat, and then we had the orchestra kind of coming in with these little weird clusters and things. And it was fun, and it was great. And we again, it was even when Andy the snake was sitting in the movie theater, she's whispering into this guy's ear, and we recorded these balls that click that they use for hypnotizing people, and so we sampled that, and we kind of put them in as these blocks, and then with the heartbeat. And then we bring in these sort of. I remember we had what was it, bowls and celeste we were using, I think, at the same time. Is that what it was? Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, it worked out great because it was kind of this sound that would lean itself to these different characters, but then we put other things on top of it. And I remember in an article we were talking, I don't know if it was like Rolling Stone or someone, and we were joking saying like the difficulty of scoring to a heartbeat. We were like joking, like, because it's not particularly difficult to play to a heartbeat. And then I saw that the person took us seriously, and I was like, oh wow, whoops, you know. But it was definitely a great idea. You know, I've seen the heartbeat used in a few films where they're actually some of my favorite films. The Thing uses a heartbeat, like this heartbeat in a couple places, along with that bass line, and you know, and obviously in The Shining. So it's great.
Well, and it's also, we sort of took special care to, like, Taylor came up with the actual like heartbeat sound. He's the one who like crafted the sound itself. And then after we had like a heartbeat that we were liking, because you can get samples of heartbeats, you can create your own. So Taylor created like sort of our own, so we could have sort of our own. And the idea was that like most heartbeats are like known as like two beats basically, right? Boom, 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 boom. And we had this idea of having the heartbeat be a little more like what would it sound like if you were like standing on a valve entering the heart? And it would actually be sort of three sounds, like the rush in of the blood followed by the two pumps. You know, so it's more of, if you listen to it in the film, you'll hear it sort of sounds like three beats, and that it's like a boom, 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 boom. And then to make it even more complicated, we discovered that like having the heartbeat be to a tempo wasn't working. It sounded too
organized,
expected,
I guess, yeah,
too organized. So it was like, it's great, but it was a pain in the ass. It was a pain in the ass to record with it.
It was a pain, yeah. Especially when we were cranking the hurdy grande to the heartbeat. We had to. So what we do is we made two patches. One where there was the heartbeat to the grid, and then we'd have like a contact instrument that basically would bring it in, and you could speed it up or slow it down by turning a knob that we created. So that allowed us to kind of go on grid and go off grid. And so to be honest, I guess it was a pain with the orchestra, but you know, because of that constant fluctuating. But it was very effective. And our music editor Snacky, he really he helped, we crafted the sound and got it going, and then he was great about just giving it like some extra beef. Like every time it would be delivered to the stage, he gave it like this, would just call it snackified, and it worked. And it was, and it was helpful to get even feedback from him early on when we did a version that wasn't to tempo. I think Taylor and I were both like, no, let's redo it, it needs to be in tempo to the track. And Snacky was like, no, I think it feels better. So it's great that all perspectives of your team are sort of helpful with the input of that.
Yeah, and it also seems like there's times where it speeds up and then it slows down. Like when Rose the Hat is the camera turns around and she lands on the street. It goes ba-boom, 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 and then finally she lands.
Yep, yeah. 100%.
That particular cue, we had. I remember we had some polyrhythms going on actually in the section, and it was so much fun because one part of the orchestra would do this and we record them, and then we do another recording and they'd be doing this, and we blend the two. And just that kind of stuff mixed with that heartbeat coming in, you started to feel really off kilter. And so, and look, that was Mike's idea to go with that. And it worked out really well. And it's super disturbing.
So now moving on to the Haunting of Bly Manor. One of the things that I think really, really worked in the Haunting of Hill House is the musical contrast. When there was something really sad happening, you have this really almost beautifully tragic piano line playing, and I feel like that just gives so much heart to the story. And for example, the ending of Hereditary, when it's super scary but there's happy music playing, or there's certain moments where that works so well, where scoring it the opposite way actually has more impact. For example, There's the scene in Bly Manor where I don't want to spoil anything, but it's in the hospital room when she's told a certain news from the doctor about her boyfriend. And instead of scoring it with sad violins, you play that that piano melody, which is almost happy. It's got that, you know, E minor to G major kind of thing. And it works so much better than if you were to have scored it sentimentally. So first of all, where did that theme come from? Because you could put it anywhere and it works perfectly. So who wrote that and how did that evolve?
We worked with Mike. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, buddy. No, go ahead.
We worked with Mike on that. So Mike had some ideas and about this idea, this riff and this melody. And so he came up some stuff, and then we took it and arranged different pieces, and we kind of did different things with it. But that's sort of how it started, you know, because I think Mike was sitting down because Mike's a great piano player. Right? He was sitting down for season 1, and he was just playing this. I had this idea, and then he would send stuff to us. We would send stuff to him, which is like that never happens. You know what I mean? With any director. So obviously for us, we're like a kid in a candy store, and so he had these ideas, and so we took his ideas and we kind of moved some stuff around and added strings and did different things. But you know, I got to give credit where credit's due. Mike is really involved in that. That's his you know emotion. That's where his ideas came from. That particular piece I think you're talking about. But yeah, we were able to take that sort of neutral idea where it makes you feel sad and happy, and it's just kind of in that world where the way the chord progression plays, it's not dictating too much necessarily, and you can use it in different places. So it's quite clever.
So what was your guys' approach for taking, because obviously The Haunting of Bly Manor is a sequel series. It's in the same general world as The Haunting of Hill House, and it has the same vibe and feel, but it's a different show. It's different characters. It's a different location. You know, Henry Thomas is British now instead of American. So it's a totally different thing. How do you guys take your ideas from the original show, but say, okay, we're in a different place, and here's how we're going to change it to accommodate? How do you guys start with that?
I mean, it's just it's almost just about sort of diving in with it. It was like, okay, let's keep the thematic stuff from season 1, but let's try new stuff too. You know, like let's try new like thematic ideas. Let's try new dark sounds. Let's sort of go for all of it. And I think that we were all sort of finding our way, all of us, like Taylor and I, Mike, the producers. Like, I think early on there was no like, let's just do this, and the train just kept going in that direction. I think it was a lot of like, let's use some of season 1, let's use none of season 1, let's see sort of what's happening. And I think as we started to get footage, that's sort of when you can kind of feel what's working, you know, like, oh, is this going to be too emotionally heavy for the content? Does it need to be different? It's in the 80s, but Mike was very clear to us, like he wanted no 80s score. Like he wanted it to just be, yeah. That was something from the get-go that never changed. It was like, we're not going to do an 80s score. Let's sort of keep it in the family instrumentation wise and see where we go. And as the process evolved, it just started, new themes started landing and started working, new variations. I mean, there are a handful of places where exact cues from season 1 are in this season, but I want to say it's very minimal. It might happen 3 times in all of the season. The rest, everything was a re-record, because we were very adamant about that in season 1, that like, even if the theme is just the piano playing one of the themes in a scene and it's still a slow version of that, we would re-record it all over uniquely for that scene, because we wanted it to feel unique to that scene, even if no one knew, even if someone was like, oh, the same cue played in these 9 scenes throughout season 1, all of those were recorded uniquely. And so we kind of did the same with this. We were like, let's just start redoing things. And then there was a nice cohesion between like some of the new stuff and some of the old stuff, and then tying in the Oh Willow Whaley, and then adding sort of the music box. Like it was a nice, it came, I want to say, I wish I could say from the get-go we all sort of knew what the roadmap would be, but I think that like as we got into it, it really started to evolve very nicely.
I remember one night the power in where we are, this shut down, and it was out for like, I don't know, 6 hours. And we had to send a batch of cues to Mike of new stuff, new ideas. And we really wanted this sort of this waltz, this kind of, the whole score is pretty much a waltz, but we wanted this particular waltz for this scene. And we just sat down to the piano and just like, we just wrote it out and just did it. And it ended up being used in the film, and everybody loves it. And it was one of those things where it just kind of worked, and Mike gravitated towards it. And that's kind of how the process went. We would try things, and like Andy said, it just, each scene would inform what we wanted to do with what was working. And of course, the innocence, Willow O'Whaley, was a big factor in that.
We wanted to recraft but keep it the same. So it has similar structure, but there are definitely some different things about it this season.
The one film that kept coming to my mind when I was watching Bly Manor is this movie that came out a few years ago called Crimson Peak. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's a Guillermo del Toro movie, and it takes place in this Victorian mansion. And
cool.
And it's a gothic romance, and I think at its core, Bly Manor is really a romance. It's about all these different relationships that are overlapping. Everybody is each facing their own demons of their past, just like in Haunting of Hill House, but these relationships are at the forefront. And I could tell there were a lot of cues that were so different from Hill House because of that new element of the romance. So how did you guys embrace that new element of the storytelling, that romantic quality?
You want to go first, or?
Sure. I mean, we kind of just followed we followed the story very adamantly, and the score kind of reflects that. Like, even on the soundtrack, we kind of noticed that the score evolves as the episodes go, in a way that sort of takes you along the journey with what's going, like, I don't want to ruin anything. So, but there are a lot of storylines that sort of, even one that kind of like really does a 180 in how it evolves. And we wanted to sort of follow that, but not point any fingers at it. And so a lot of it is sort of like drafting, like when runners in the Olympics, they draft, they'll get like right behind another runner, and there's less wind flow, and so they can use less energy. I feel like we are often drafting off of the story and the picture that Mike is telling. Like, we just kind of like get up behind the story and just like support it lightly as we go. That way it's not like, oh, look at this is coming, or this just happened, like, ta-da. I think those subtleties and nuances are like, it's sort of hard to find those nuances and those subtleties, because you have to be very sensitive to it. And I think that's something that's nice about having worked on this. Now our 8th project with Mike, is that like we all respect each other's sensitivity, in not sensitive like don't hurt my feelings, but sensitivity of like, hey, I feel this way because of this. Like, if we say that to Mike, he'll take it in. He might disagree and want to do something else, but we all sort of collaborate in that way. Even the producer, Trevor Macy, will have like a sensitivity to a scene because of music, and there's a dialogue around it. And I think that that's very important in the process. It's not the most fun in that you're at the, piano or picking up the guitar and like making noise that's like pleasing your ears, but it's a really rewarding part of the process to sort of collaborate on that level.
One thing I was wondering when I was watching the series and I was just watching it play through, I like to do these exercises where I try to think like you guys watching it for the first time and seeing like, okay, how would I score this? And one thing I was wondering is like, do you guys have like a common language with Mike at this point after 8 projects, where you're just like thinking when you're writing, like, oh, Mike would probably want something like this, or Mike wouldn't like this. When you guys are scoring like a scene, for example, in Bly Manor, are you guys thinking about your guys' past collaborations with Mike and in regards to what you think he might like or what he wouldn't like, or are you guys completely just sort of experimenting and just sort of open with everything?
I think we do both. I think it depends on the scene, but I know a lot of times when we're spotting the scene, and there's like no music, for instance, or even if there is music, we kind of like, oh, okay, well, this was deliberately put in there. Mike Mike is very specific too about the temp. Like he likes to use no temp.
Wow.
And yeah, and for the haunting, or for Bly Manor, he temped some of it with obviously with Hill House. So, we'd have discussions about like, well, is this working for you, or what you're liking about this? And of course, when he wasn't around, we would come to scenes and we would have definitely discussions about, okay, this is deliberately set like it's minimal for this reason, and we would be like, let's cross the fingers and hope that's what was intended. But sometimes it's not, and sometimes you need to go to the end of it and fail to succeed. But I think that process is great, and this season, again, being so having that gothic romance, we were able to incorporate some new ideas, which made it fun, and kind of tie certain elements together. Because it's funny, because people keep asking us about, well, the themes of the characters they're like, this is Danny's theme, and da 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 da. I smile because I laugh because it's interesting, because we do certain reoccurring motifs for characters, but really it's about the connection of how they're all affected by the place.
The thing that I noticed this time around is the music is also like, how in the olden days there used to be a storyteller when everybody's sitting around the fire, in the olden times, and he's telling the story,
Yep.
and each story is different, but it's all the same orator. For me, that is
Yep.
the score. Like the score is at its essence. When certain things come in, it almost sounds like somebody is telling us this story, which is just so beautiful. And I think that it works so well with the storytelling. And especially because you're using themes from season 1 in season 2, it almost has that element of hearing a story from an orator, which sounds so great. One question I have in regards to Bly Manor, there's this new theme, and I told Taylor about it, but it's dun 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 dun. So where did that come from? I love that.
So again, that was the theme that we wrote when the power went out. So Mike needed to hear some more pieces, and we under a deadline. So I put Andy on the phone, and we sat down, and I said, hey, what about this? And he's like, well, let's try this. And so we went back and forth for a bit, and that's sort of the evolution of that piece. And then Mike heard it, and and then that's kind of how that happened. And then Andy took it and did some renditions with it as well, especially in episode 8. I don't want to give away why that is in episode 8, but it's in older days. And anyways, so yeah, we tried different renditions with it, but that's how.
It must be so incredible just to look back and see all the stuff that you guys have done together over the past 10 years. What is it like just being where you guys are right now, moving into the future? Obviously, you guys have Midnight Mass coming up, but you guys have all these projects together. You guys have built this great relationship with Mike. So reminiscing about your guys' past a little bit, just tell me a little bit about where you guys are now and sort of how that feels currently at this stage.
It's we're so grateful for all of this. There's not a day that goes by where like Taylor and I don't have some sort of conversation around like how grateful we are to sort of be in the situation we're in. And also like just in the discussion of like how fun all of it is, like, again, like going back to sort of what I said earlier on about, there's stress and chaos everywhere because it is a job. But I think like looking back, it's like, wow, it's very, we're both very proud of everything we've done. We're also very grateful for it. But I think there's also the idea that in our heads, it's sort of like when we got onto Oculus, like, let's just keep doing what we've been doing. And we talk about this, I mean, almost every week. There's like a dialogue that, because Taylor and I are obviously on the phone like we may as well be married. Like we're on the phone like every day, multiple times. But we always talk about the idea that like no matter how big or small the project, like because we like it so much, keeping the process the same while expanding and using our information from the past and the knowledge we have, keeping all of those things together is really important because, I mean, in any sort of business, like everyone's chair is revolving, you know, at any time. Like, and that's not to say we would do a bad job or could do a bad job, but in anything, like if you, you know, if you're working like running yachts across a lake, like your chair is revolving. Like everyone has sort of like a, I think if you become uninterested and stop trying, or you don't care about something, I mean, you could still do it because you need to do it for a job. But I think that if you really want to do it, you need to keep sort of trying every time, you know? And it is, that being said, it is really nice to look back and having, like, I don't think I've ever really thought about it until you asked, like, what's it like to have Dr. Sleep, like, done? You know, it's like, oh yeah, it's done. Like,
We did that.
That was a big, yeah,
Right.
It was a lot of, you know, those were a lot of like sleepless nights, and it was a lot of work. And I know we're both really proud of it, and it's nice to have that. But I think that just fuels the future more, you know, which is a strange like rabbit hole, because I don't think it ever comes to a place where you feel like you're on the front of the Titanic. Well, I mean, I don't think you'd ever want to be on the front of the Titanic looking back, but you know, there's no moment where it's like, yes, like we made it, or this is great, or whatever. I think that's the point where you know.
It was something like what Matthew McConaughey said at the Oscars when he was like, I always set my future self, or I always set my goal to be myself 10 years from now. And when I get to that 10 years later, it's always me 10 years from that point. So I never catch up with myself. Is it sort of like that with you guys?
Absolutely.
1,000%. Yes. Sorry, Taylor. I didn't mean to keep talking, but that's sort of how I feel.
I love it. No, I mean, you said it, man. That is definitely the case. I think, you know, it drives the fire to be better. I mean, you know, you and I were just talking about it, that how, you know, John Williams, how he just, you know, I think he tries to outdo himself every time. He's always trying to be a better version of himself. He's not trying to be better than some other composer. He's trying to be better than himself. And I think Andy and I are always trying to raise the bar, and how can we be better? How can we do more for this project? And we take it project by project. And I think it's important, again, that if you become satisfied and this is just a job and you become too comfortable, I think sometimes it also not even just, I don't know, it doesn't yield the best results. You know, you look at some of the best scores that at least I love and admire, that I know of the composer. Sometimes there's been a little bit of, you know, sacrifice. Doesn't mean there needs to be pain and suffering for every project, but you need to try, you know what I mean? And I think that element is important. And we always, even the things we're not working on with Mike, we're always trying to figure out, you know, hey, how can we elevate this?
Last time I spoke to you guys, I asked you a question regarding what you guys would recommend for composers. And you guys had an incredible answer to that, which I isolated and I posted, which said essentially, be yourself, be original, you know, get involved in as much as you can, all that kind of stuff. What I want to ask you today is, given our circumstances in the year 2020, everything has changed. There's a lot of people without work. Obviously, a lot of productions have shut down. Netflix has opened up under certain requirements and everything like that. My question to you guys is, if you guys were able to speak to maybe not just composers, but people currently in the industry that are sort of, you know, waiting for some kind of deliverance, which might be next year, might be whenever, what would you guys recommend just in regards to keeping people's spirits up and that kind of thing?
I think it's really important to just remembering that this will pass. You know what I mean? This will end, and there will be a new change, that things kind of progress. And I think it's about thinking about when that moment comes and how you're going to be prepared to take advantage of it the best that you can, and also what you can do now in that time to prep for it, or even things you could do now. That, you know, there's guys that we know who are just incredible session musicians that are out of work, and you know, we hire them, and other friends have hired them as much as possible. But some of them have started teaching, some of them have started you know, writing on some albums that they want to make themselves. And I think that this opportunity also has a moment to kind of look at yourself and be like, hey, what could I do better? What could I be better? Because as Andy said, there's a revolving door, and any of us can be replaced, and you always need to be grateful for the opportunities you have. And I think now more than anything, people are very grateful for the chances to work in any capacity. And I think just keeping positive, because I have also a lot of friends who, unfortunately, they go up and down, and they have moments where they get super negative, and it's just like nobody wants to hire you. Unfortunately, nobody wants to work with you when you're bitter. You need to always look that things can change on a snap. We've had opportunities come that we didn't expect just happen. So I think it's good to put yourself out there and to make yourself available too, and like call your friends and call everyone so that way people know your availability and where you are. So it gives opportunity.
I think that, I mean, it's been overused, but it's so true, about slow and steady wins the race. And there's no winning necessarily, if you just want to be a composer, but there's realities too, right? There's how do I pay my bills, and how do I stay happy within the craft that I'm doing? And I think that a director we worked with a long time ago, he's one of the only living Dirty Dozen still alive. I think he was one of the original cast members. He directed a film, and he told us something, this was years ago, interesting, which was, he's a writer, he's a director as well, but he says, every morning I like to get up at 5 a.m. I make tea and I write for 2 hours. I don't know if I'm going to use what I write. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm going to be engaged in my craft for those 2 hours. And then the rest of the day, it could be pitching, it could be shooting a commercial, it could be whatever it is. And I think that sort of applies strongly during sort of these pandemic times. It's like everyone has different levels of stress, and I can't understand Taylor's stress or your stress, Ashton. We all have different stress levels, just as people listening to this have different realities. And I think that if you can find an hour or 2 hours in your day, if you can find 15 minutes in your day to do what your craft is and just be completely engrossed in it and focus on it, and then the rest of your day, or a big portion of your day, dedicated to whatever it is, paying the bills, be spending time with family, whatever you need to do. I think that comes back to the slow and steady wins the race, right? It's not just about it's not to say that you're going to just sit down and score an epic film or an epic TV show, but if you're engaged in your craft, when that call comes, you're going to be ready. And it'll also put your mind in the world of how can I do more? There's more student projects being done than ever right now because of the technology. So I think that I still come back to the more you can score, the better. And it won't be very glorious sometimes, it'll be a film.
And I will say this, that kind of relates to composing, which is very fascinating. There is a friend of Andy and ours who got an opportunity to score a big movie, one of the biggest movies. I don't want to say names or make less of anybody, but he was very excited to do it, but he became a little bit cocky, a little bit like I've done it, I've reached it, and and rightfully so on a huge project. He had that moment. Unfortunately, the studio fired him because the music wasn't working. And to be fair to him, he did what the director wanted, and he thought that's the way it went. But it's so quickly how something can change like that, and so it's always really good to just keep trying and just know that things can change for the worse or the better on a dime.
Yeah, and back to the original thing that we said, I think last time, which was just be yourself. I can't overstress that. And being yourself always feels the most uncomfortable. If you're doing something and you think everyone hates your idea, you're probably in a pretty good space, because if you're doing something that everyone loves and is familiar with, it's going to be boring. It's already been done. It's only going to have so much sort of distance that it can run. But if you're doing something and you feel uncomfortable about it, and it feels like yourself, I would always say embrace it. Like, send us an email. We'll support you, like, however crazy it is, for sure.
You guys have done so much incredible work and so much to be happy about, and I look forward to speaking to you guys next time to chat further about this stuff. But thank you guys so
Likewise,
much
brother.
for everything.
Man,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Really appreciate it, man.